I recently got a comment about Owen Garriott's infamous prank in which he pretended to have smuggled his wife aboard the Skylab space station. It read, "There are other space pranks?" Oh yeah, a lot. Given that space, the final frontier, is such a stressful place to work, it makes sense that astronauts and cosmonauts try to keep things light from time to time.
One of the earliest practical jokes occurred on Gemini 3, NASA's first crewed Gemini flight. Gus Grissom wasn't a fan of NASA's earliest attempts at astronaut food, and his colleague, John Young, knew it. So as a surprise, he smuggled on a corned beef sandwich from one of Gus's favorite Cocoa Beach restaurants. But when Young removed the several-day-old meat sandwich from its hiding place, let's just say that the pungent odor quickly filled the capsule cabin, which was no larger than the front seats of a compact car. "What is it?" Grissom asked. "Corned beef sandwich," Young said. "Where did it come from?" "I brought it with me," Young said, and then admitted, "Smells, doesn't it?" It was a thought anyway." "Yep, not a very good one," Young confessed.
That wasn't the only Gemini prank.
Wally Schirra and Tom Stafford were aboard Gemini 6A on December 16, 1965, when Schirra radioed that they'd spotted a UFO. With a quiver in his voice, Schirra said, "Looks like a satellite, going from north to south, probably in polar orbit." After a few moments, he updated ground control, saying, "I see a command module and 8 smaller modules in front. The pilot of the command module is wearing a red suit." Before Houston could react, he and Stafford began playing Jingle Bells on a miniature harmonica and sleigh bells that they'd snuck aboard. Shortly before the launch of Apollo 12, a cockroach was found wandering around the command module. The ground crew tried to locate and remove the insect, but was never able to find it. On the way back from the second successful moon landing, Commander Pete Conrad took part in an in-flight televised press conference. Near the end of the broadcast, he held up a piece of cardboard showing the smushed remains of a 6-legged stowaway. "You found him, huh?" Mission Control asked. "We sure did," Conrad replied. "He was in the food locker." "Is he fat?" "He's very fat."
Conrad later admitted that he'd made the whole thing up. He'd smuggled a plastic toy aboard. Whether or not the real thing became the first cockroach in space is anybody's guess. But this wasn't the only Apollo 12 prank either.
During their moonwalk, Conrad and crewmate Alan Bean consulted spiral-bound notebooks strapped to their wrists, detailing the many tasks they needed to undertake. At one point, Bean flipped the page and discovered Playboy's Miss December 1969 looking back at him. Beneath it was the caption, "Don't forget, describe the protuberances." The Apollo 12 backup crew had managed to get their hands on the notebooks just before the flight and had left their colleagues some visual gags.
This whole conversation started because of Owen Garriott's Skylab 3 prank, but he and his shipmates weren't done yet.
When the Skylab 4 crew arrived to take over the station, they discovered that the disembarking crew had left a little something behind. The previous astronauts had taken several old overalls, stuffed them with garbage, fashioned heads out of bags, and distributed them throughout the station. Astronaut Edward Gibson said that the discovery was creepy, adding that it felt like they were being watched everywhere they went.
July of 1975 was one for the history books.
That's when 2 spacecraft, a U.S. Apollo Command Service module and a Soviet Soyuz module, docked in orbit around the Earth. As the Americans boarded the Russian ship, cosmonaut Alexei Leonov handed them feeding tubes adorned with various vodka labels and insisted they celebrate the auspicious occasion. Astronauts Tom Stafford and Deke Slayton hesitated at first, but didn't want to offend their Russian hosts and went in for a drink. What they got was borscht, Russia's famous red beet soup. Leonov had simply covered the original labeling with the vodka logos.
The astronauts and cosmonauts aboard the International Space Station have certainly played a number of memorable pranks, especially around April Fool's Day.
Scott Kelly once chased his fellow crewmates around the ISS while dressed in a gorilla suit. Peggy Whitson had herself delivered to the Russian segment of the ISS in a cargo bag, which she popped out of, surprising her Russian crewmates. Several Expedition 22 crew members sent an image to Mission Control of the 3 of them floating outside the cupola, sans spacesuits. Over the course of 7 hours in 2013, Chris Hadfield posted images on Twitter showing orbital debris drawing closer and closer to the station. As it did, the debris took on the very recognizable shape of a flying saucer. "I think it might be trying to board us," Hadfield posted. The final image was of himself holding a small green alien. "I don't know what it is or what it wants, but it keeps repeating Sloof Lurpa over and over," Hadfield wrote.
Sloof Lurpa is April Fool's spelled backward.
And just this year, Russian cosmonaut Ivan Wagner wore an alien mask to welcome 4 newcomers whose SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule had just docked at the ISS.
But one of the greatest pranks ever pulled off in space didn't have anyone in America laughing.
By 1968, the Soviets knew they were never going to beat the Americans to the moon. But the Americans didn't know that. On September 19th, NASA and the CIA intercepted a Russian transmission that was traced directly back to the moon. The cosmonauts were discussing telemetry and landing procedures. "Flight is normal," one of the voices said. "We are approaching the surface."
This sent the space agency and the US government into an absolute frenzy. How had they missed something this big? Well, it turns out they hadn't.
A few days earlier, the Soviets had launched their Zond 5 satellite into lunar orbit. As it rounded the moon, understandably frustrated cosmonaut Pavel Popovich bounced a transmission off the Zond 5 and back to Earth, making it appear as if it originated from the moon.
It was, he later said, just a little bit of hooliganism. Stay curious, my friends.